When hikers across America started finding the same hand-drawn map, park rangers thought it was a coincidence, until they realized the map belonged to a couple missing for 6 years. But the most disturbing part wasn't just finding the maps everywhere. It was that each one showed trails that didn't exist on any official survey, leading to places that weren't supposed to be there. Imagine losing the person you love most in a place you thought you knew by heart. That's what happened to Sarah Morrison when her parents vanished into the wilderness they'd spent their entire marriage exploring. Tom and Janet Morrison weren't your typical missing hikers. They were experts. He was a professional cartographer. She was a wilderness guide. If anyone could survive in the backcountry, it should have been them. Tom had this obsession with drawing his own maps, not because the official ones were wrong, but because he believed every trail had its own story that couldn't be captured by government surveys. His hand-drawn maps were works of art, filled with notes about hidden water sources, secret camping spots, and routes that would take you to places most people would never find. In May 2018, Tom and Janet planned their dream trip to the Great Smoky Mountains. They'd been married 15 years and had explored wilderness areas across America. But this trip was special. Tom had spent months studying satellite images and topographic surveys, looking for areas that seemed different, places where the landscape didn't quite match what the maps showed. "Dad always said the best adventures happened in the spaces between what maps could show you," Sarah later told investigators. He believed there were places that existed in the gaps, waiting for the right people to find them. The couple set up base camp in a remote valley that required a 2-day hike just to reach. For 3 days, they explored the surrounding ridges, with Tom carefully documenting every step on his hand-drawn map. His final entry was dated May 15th. "Found the trail we've been looking for. Tomorrow we follow it to see where it really goes." They never returned to base camp. Search teams found their tent exactly where they'd left it, their supplies untouched, their planned route marked clearly on the dashboard of their car back at the trailhead. But Tom and Janet had vanished completely, leaving behind only that meticulously drawn map with trails leading to coordinates that, according to every official survey, led nowhere. The search lasted 6 weeks. Rangers, volunteers, and even Sarah herself combed every square mile of the surrounding area. Helicopters flew grid patterns while ground teams pushed through dense underbrush and rocky terrain. But it was as if Tom and Janet had simply stepped off the edge of the world. 6 years passed. Sarah never stopped hoping, never stopped organizing anniversary searches, never stopped posting her parents' photos in visitor centers across the country. She kept their house exactly as they'd left it, their hiking boots by the door, Tom's drafting table covered with half-finished maps of places they'd planned to explore together. Then, the impossible began happening. A hiker in Colorado found a map wedged under a rock cairn, hand-drawn, detailed, showing topographic features that didn't match the Rocky Mountain terrain around him. At the bottom, in careful block letters, TM, May 2018. The same initials, the same date as Tom Morrison's final map entry. But how could Tom's map be in Colorado when he'd vanished in Tennessee? 3 weeks later, an identical map appeared in Utah's Zion National Park. Same precise ink lines, same handwriting, same date. Park rangers compared photographs. The maps were absolutely identical, down to the smallest stream marking and elevation note. That's when the phone calls started. Rangers in Washington State had found the same map, then Arizona, then California, always in remote locations, always discovered by solo hikers who felt strangely compelled to pick them up. Maria Santos was hiking alone in the Cascade Range when she spotted something white tucked into a fallen log. "I almost walked past it," she later said, "but something made me stop. When I unfolded that map, I got the strangest feeling, like someone was trying to tell me something important." The map Maria found showed terrain that clearly wasn't the Cascades. Gentle, rolling mountains covered in deciduous forest. Nothing like the sharp peaks and evergreen wilderness around her. but she found herself studying the hand-drawn trails anyway, tracing the careful route with her finger. "I knew it made no sense," Maria admitted, "but I started following the path anyway." The map showed a stream where I found a dry creek bed, forests where I was walking through alpine meadows, but something kept pulling me forward, like the map was more than just paper and ink. This was happening everywhere the maps appeared. Hikers found themselves following routes that didn't match their surroundings, guided by Tom's careful drawings toward destinations that shouldn't exist. And at the end of each journey, where Tom had marked base camp with a precise X, they found empty spaces that felt somehow significant. James Chen discovered this when he followed a map he'd found in California's John Muir Wilderness. "I stood where the map said their campsite should be," he recalled. "There was nothing there but rocks and scrub brush, but I swear I could smell wood smoke and hear people talking quietly, just beyond what I could actually see or hear clearly. The reports were always the same." Hikers following Tom's impossible maps to their conclusion found themselves in places that felt different, charged with an energy they couldn't explain. Some heard voices. Others saw movement in their peripheral vision. All of them came away with the unshakable feeling that they'd stood at the edge of something much larger than they could understand. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was a physicist at the University of Tennessee when she first heard about the maps. Her specialty was studying dimensional anomalies, places where the normal rules of space and time seemed to break down. When she learned that identical maps were appearing in wilderness areas across America, all traced back to a missing couple from her home state, she knew she had to investigate. "Objects don't duplicate themselves and appear in multiple locations," Dr. Rodriguez explained to her research team, "but these maps are doing exactly that. Either we're dealing with the most elaborate hoax in history, or we're seeing evidence of something that challenges everything we think we know about reality." Her first expedition was to the original site in the Great Smoky Mountains, the coordinates where Tom had marked their final base camp. The location looked completely ordinary, a small clearing beside a mountain stream, surrounded by typical Appalachian forest. But Dr. Rodriguez's instruments detected something extraordinary. Magnetic fields fluctuated wildly around the site. Atomic clocks synchronized to GPS satellites registered tiny but measurable differences in the flow of time. Electromagnetic sensors picked up faint signals that seemed to originate from multiple directions simultaneously, as if the clearing existed in several places at once. "Standing there, you could feel that something was different," Dr. Rodriguez later wrote. "Every instinct told you that this was a place where normal rules didn't apply. I understood immediately why Tom Morrison would have been fascinated by this location." But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Rodriguez's team discovered similar anomalies at every location where Tom's maps had been found. Each discovery site showed the same electromagnetic distortions, the same temporal irregularities, the same sense of existing slightly outside normal reality. "We weren't just dealing with missing persons anymore," she realized. "We were studying places where the boundary between dimensions had somehow become permeable." The investigation expanded as more maps appeared. Each discovery followed the same pattern. A solo hiker in a remote location, finding Tom's carefully drawn route tucked away where it would be protected from weather but visible to anyone looking carefully. Always the same map, always weathered in ways that matched the local environment, always leading to places that didn't exist on any official survey. Sarah Morrison had been following the investigation from the beginning, hope growing with each new discovery. Her parents weren't just lost. They were somehow still out there, still trying to communicate. But communicate what? The answer came from Tom's own research, hidden in files on his computer that Sarah finally worked up the courage to examine. Her father had been studying what he called dimensional cartography, the theory that certain locations existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Tom had spent years collecting stories of places where people reported unusual experiences, areas where compasses spun wildly, where hikers became disoriented despite perfect conditions, where the same trail seemed to lead to different destinations depending on who walked it. He believed these locations were weak points in reality, places where other dimensions pressed close to our own. Maps aren't just drawings of where you've been, Tom had written in his final research notes. They're instructions for where you can go. And if you know how to read them properly, they might show you routes to places that exist in other versions of reality. His theory was that skilled cartographers could potentially map pathways between dimensions, creating guides for crossing from one reality to another. The carefully marked trails, precise GPS coordinates, and detailed landmarks on his final map might represent exactly that, a functional guide for dimensional travel. If Tom was right, his disappearance with Janet might not have been an accident. They might have deliberately followed a route that took them into an alternate reality, one where the same landscape existed but operated under different physical laws. The maps appearing across America could be their attempts to communicate from wherever they'd gone, showing others the path they'd taken. Dr. Rodriguez decided to test this theory. Using advanced equipment borrowed from quantum physics laboratories, her team returned to Tom's marked coordinates in the Great Smoky Mountains. They set up a monitoring station and began recording everything: electromagnetic signals, temporal fluctuations, even subtle changes in air pressure and temperature. On their third night, something extraordinary happened. At exactly 3:33 a.m., their radio equipment picked up a transmission on emergency frequencies. The signal was clear but brief. Two voices, unmistakably Tom and Janet Morrison, talking quietly about trail conditions and weather patterns. "The path is stable here," Tom's voice said through the static. "We can rest for a while, but we need to keep moving. The map is working, but I think we're affecting the boundaries somehow." Janet's response was softer but equally clear. "People are finding our route. I can feel them following the trails we've drawn. Should we be worried about that?" "No," Tom replied. "If they're finding the maps, maybe that means it's working the way it's supposed to. Maybe we're leaving breadcrumbs for others who need to find their way to wherever this is." The transmission lasted only 47 seconds before fading into static. Dr. Rodriguez's team replayed it dozens of times, analyzing every word, every background sound, every fluctuation in signal strength. Audio experts confirmed the voices belonged to Tom and Janet Morrison, but raised disturbing questions about the transmission itself. The signal showed characteristics impossible for normal radio equipment. It seemed to originate from multiple locations simultaneously, broadcasting on frequencies that required more power than any portable device could generate. Most unnervingly, spectral analysis revealed that the voices were speaking in an acoustic environment that didn't match any known terrestrial location. "They're not just missing," Dr. Rodriguez announced to her team. "They're somewhere else entirely, somewhere that exists parallel to our reality but operates under different physical laws." The implications were staggering. If Tom and Janet had successfully crossed into an alternate dimension, what did that mean for the hundreds of other people who disappeared in wilderness areas each year? How many missing persons cases might have similar explanations? Dr. Rodriguez expanded her research, organizing expeditions to every location where Tom's maps had been discovered. Her teams documented electromagnetic anomalies at each site, mapping what appeared to be a network of dimensional weak points stretching across the American wilderness. The pattern that emerged was remarkable. The discovery sites weren't random. They formed geometric relationships with each other, as if the locations were connected by some underlying structure that existed outside normal space-time. Tom's maps weren't just appearing anywhere. They were manifesting at specific coordinates that formed part of a larger dimensional network. Tom Morrison wasn't just a cartographer. Dr. Rodriguez realized. He was mapping something much more complex than hiking trails. He was charting pathways through a multi-dimensional landscape that most people can't even perceive. The research attracted international attention. Scientists from universities around the world traveled to study the sites, bringing increasingly sophisticated equipment to measure the anomalies. The media dubbed it the Morrison effect, and the story captured public imagination in ways that traditional missing persons cases never had. But for Sarah Morrison, the science mattered less than the hope it represented. Somewhere, in a wilderness that existed in the spaces between realities, her parents were still together, still exploring, still finding ways to reach out to the world they'd left behind. Every time someone finds one of Dad's maps, I feel like he's still trying to take care of people, Sarah said during a television interview. He's still being the guide he always was, just from a place we can't see or reach. The maps continued appearing with increasing frequency. Each discovery brought new reports of hikers following the impossible routes, experiencing glimpses of other realities at the journey's end. Some heard conversations in familiar voices. Others saw landscapes that flickered between what was there and what the map showed should be there. A support network developed among the discoverers, people who'd followed Tom's maps and experienced something they couldn't explain. They met online, sharing stories and trying to make sense of what they'd encountered. Many reported feeling changed by the experience, more aware of the hidden depths that might exist in ordinary places. Following that map was like being given permission to believe in magic again, wrote Lisa Park, who'd found Tom's route in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest. For just a few hours, I walked in a world where impossible things were not only possible, they were real. The phenomenon began affecting other missing persons cases. Families of people who disappeared in wilderness areas started reporting unusual discoveries of their own. Personal items appearing in impossible locations, messages found in places their loved ones had never visited, experiences that suggested the missing weren't lost in any conventional sense. Dr. Rodriguez established the Interdimensional Research Institute, dedicated to studying what she termed reality boundaries, places where our dimension intersected with others. Her work evolved beyond the Morrison case to investigate a global phenomenon that had been dismissed as folklore and superstition for centuries. Tom and Janet Morrison didn't just get lost, she explained at a conference that drew researchers from 6 continents. They found something, and they're still finding ways to share that discovery with the rest of us. The most recent developments have been the most remarkable yet. Tom's maps are no longer appearing randomly. They're showing up in locations that correspond to ongoing missing persons cases, as if someone is deliberately placing them where the families of the disappeared might find them. A map appeared in the search area where a missing father and son were last seen in Montana. Another was discovered along the route a vanished couple had planned to take in Alaska. Each time the maps don't just show Tom's original route, they include new markings, additional trails that seem to connect Tom's journey to the paths taken by others who've disappeared into the dimensional network. It's like Dad's map has become something bigger than what he originally drew, Sarah observed, like it's growing, connecting to other people who found their way into that other world. Maybe they're all together now, all the missing hikers and families who've crossed over. Maybe they're creating a community in a place we can't reach, but they can show us glimpses of. The implications continue expanding. If dimensional crossings are possible, if skilled cartographers can map routes between realities, what does that mean for human exploration? Are there entire worlds waiting to be discovered in the spaces between what we think we know? Some researchers believe humanity is on the verge of a new age of exploration, one that doesn't require traveling through space, but rather through the layered realities that exist all around us. Tom Morrison's map might be just the beginning, the first guide to territories that exist in dimensions we're only starting to understand. Dr. Rodriguez's latest research suggests that the dimensional network Tom discovered might extend far beyond Earth. Radio telescopes are detecting signals that match the patterns found at Morrison effect sites, suggesting that the phenomenon might be cosmic in scale. If other worlds, other civilizations, have discovered dimensional travel, Tom's maps might represent humanity's first contact with a truly universal community. But the most important discoveries remain personal ones. Every person who's found Tom's map followed its impossible route and stood in the spaces between realities comes away with the same fundamental understanding. The world is far more mysterious, far more connected, and far more wonderful than anyone imagined. Today, 8 years after Tom and Janet Morrison vanished into the Great Smoky Mountains, their hand-drawn map continues guiding people to discoveries that challenge everything we think we know about reality. Each appearance brings new hope to families of missing persons, new possibilities for scientific understanding, and new evidence that love can transcend even the boundaries between dimensions. The map appears because the journey continues. Somewhere in a wilderness that spans multiple realities, Tom and Janet Morrison are still exploring, still discovering new territories, still drawing routes for others to follow. Their camping trip has become something eternal, an exploration that bridges worlds and connects all who are brave enough to believe that some adventures never really end. And for those willing to follow the carefully drawn trails, Tom's map remains what it always was. An invitation to discover that the wilderness holds wonders far greater than anyone ever dared to imagine, and that some love stories don't end when people disappear. They just begin exploring in places where most people don't know to look. The map keeps appearing because some guides never stop guiding, even from dimensions we can't see. And in that truth, every family who's ever lost someone to the wilderness can find both mystery and hope, knowing that disappearance might not mean ending. It might just mean beginning an adventure in places where love can map routes through realities most of us will never see. But the story doesn't end there. Because 3 months ago, something changed in the pattern of discoveries. The maps weren't just appearing randomly anymore. They were showing up in the hands of specific people at moments when they needed guidance most. Rebecca Chen was hiking alone in Wyoming's Wind River Range, struggling with the decision to divorce her husband of 20 years, when she found Tom's map folded inside her own backpack. She was certain it hadn't been there when she'd packed that morning, but there it was, tucked between her first aid kit and emergency shelter. I sat on a rock beside a mountain lake, holding this impossible map, and suddenly I understood something about my own life, Rebecca later said. The trails we think we're supposed to follow aren't always the ones that lead us where we need to go. Sometimes you have to trust a different kind of navigation. She followed Tom's route through landscape that didn't match her Wyoming surroundings, but found herself walking through emotional territory she'd been afraid to explore. At the journey's end, standing where Tom had marked his base camp in a place that existed somewhere between realities, Rebecca experienced a clarity about her marriage that she'd been seeking for years. I heard Janet's voice as clearly as if she was standing beside me, Rebecca recalled. She said, "Some paths look wrong on the map, but they take you exactly where you need to be." I knew then that my marriage wasn't broken. We'd just been following the wrong trail through our problems. The phenomenon attracted the attention of psychologists and therapists, who began studying the therapeutic effects of following impossible maps. Dr. Sarah Winters, a trauma specialist, organized the first Morrison Map Therapy sessions, where people who'd discovered the maps shared their experiences with trained counselors. There's something profound about following a path that shouldn't exist to reach a destination that isn't really there, Dr. Winters explained. It forces people to trust their intuition over their rational mind, to believe in possibilities they can't prove. That shift in thinking often unlocks solutions to problems they've been struggling with for years. But the maps weren't just providing individual guidance anymore. They began appearing in clusters around locations where communities were facing collective crises. After a devastating wildfire in California, Tom's maps were found by 17 different residents of the affected area, all within the same week. Each person who followed the route reported receiving insights about how their community could rebuild not just their homes, but their connections to each other. Stories like Rebecca's became increasingly common. People discovered Tom's maps at crucial moments in their lives, always when they were facing decisions that required a different kind of courage. A teenager contemplating suicide found the map on the day she'd planned to end her life. A businessman on the verge of bankruptcy discovered it in his briefcase during the most important meeting of his career. A mother whose son had been deployed overseas found it in her mailbox on the anniversary of his departure. Dr. Rodriguez began documenting these targeted discoveries, trying to understand how the maps were finding their way to specific people at precisely the right moments. Her research revealed something remarkable. Every person who received a map during a personal crisis reported that following its route provided exactly the insight they needed to navigate their real-world challenges. It's as if Tom and Janet have become some kind of dimensional counselors, Dr. Rodriguez observed. They're not just lost in another reality. They're actively helping people find their way through difficult passages in this one. The town of Cedar Falls, Montana, discovered this when 5 families found Tom's maps after their local mining company shut down, leaving hundreds of people unemployed. Following the map's impossible routes, residents reported visions of new possibilities for their community, alternative industries that could thrive in their mountain location, ways to work together that they'd never considered before. We followed those maps through terrain that didn't exist, but somehow we found a future for our town that we couldn't see before, said Mayor Linda Foster. Tom Morrison's map didn't just show us trails through the wilderness. It showed us pathways through our problems. Sarah Morrison had been monitoring these developments with a mixture of wonder and grief. Her parents had become something beyond missing persons. They'd transformed into guides for people facing their own impossible journeys. But she still missed them with an ache that never diminished, still wondered if there might be a way to reach them directly. The answer came during the 8th anniversary of their disappearance. Sarah had organized her usual memorial hike to their last known campsite, expecting the familiar pilgrimage of hope and remembrance. But this time something was different. She found a new map waiting for her at the coordinates where her parents had vanished. Not Tom's familiar route through the Great Smoky Mountains, but something entirely different. This map showed a trail she recognized from her childhood, the path behind her parents' house that they'd walked together every evening when she was growing up. The map was drawn in Janet's handwriting, not Tom's, and at the bottom, instead of coordinates and dates, was a simple message. Some journeys are meant to be taken together. When you're ready, follow this trail home. Sarah stared at the map for a long time, understanding immediately what it meant. This wasn't just another dimensional guide for strangers to discover. This was an invitation, a route that could potentially take her to wherever her parents had gone. But following that trail would mean leaving behind everything she'd built in the 8 years since their disappearance. Her work with the Morrison Foundation, her relationships, her life in a reality where she could help other families facing similar losses. Was she ready to abandon all of that for the possibility of reuniting with her parents in a dimension she might never be able to return from? Dr. Rodriguez was with Sarah when the map was discovered. She'd become more than a researcher over the years. She was Sarah's closest friend and trusted advisor. When Sarah showed her Janet's map, Dr. Rodriguez immediately understood its significance. "This is what we've been working toward," she said quietly. "All the research, all the expeditions, all the attempts to understand the phenomenon, it's been leading to this moment. The question is, are you prepared for what might happen if you follow that trail?" Sarah spent weeks considering the decision. She consulted with other families who'd lost loved ones to dimensional crossings, seeking their perspectives on whether reunion was worth the risk of permanent separation from the known world. She spoke with people who'd followed Tom's maps and returned changed, trying to understand what kinds of transformations awaited those who stepped fully into the spaces between realities. The answer came from an unexpected source, a new transmission from Tom and Janet themselves. Dr. Rodriguez's monitoring equipment at the original site picked up the strongest signal yet, a 37-minute conversation between Tom, Janet, and several other voices that investigators couldn't identify. The discussion revealed that Tom and Janet weren't alone in their dimensional exile. They'd encountered other missing persons who'd crossed over, forming what Tom described as a community of explorers who've learned to navigate between worlds. "We found others," Tom's voice explained during the transmission. "People who disappeared from different places, different times, but all following similar paths. We're building something here, not just a place to exist, but a base camp for helping people in your reality find their way through impossible situations." Janet's voice added context that made Sarah's decision even more complex. "We can see both worlds from here, Sarah. We can help people in your reality, but we can also explore territories that don't exist in any single dimension. It's not just about being lost or found anymore. It's about discovering that reality is much bigger than anyone imagined." The most significant revelation came when Tom addressed Sarah directly. "If you choose to follow the map your mother drew, you won't be leaving your world behind permanently. You'll be learning to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, but it's not a decision to make lightly. Once you understand how to navigate between dimensions, you can never go back to believing that only one reality exists." Sarah realized that her parents weren't asking her to abandon her life. They were inviting her to expand it beyond the boundaries of a single dimension. The map Janet had drawn wouldn't take her away from her work helping missing persons' families. It would give her new ways to provide that help, new perspectives on what disappearance and discovery might really mean. After 2 months of preparation, Sarah decided to follow her mother's map. Dr. Rodriguez documented every step of the journey, using the most advanced dimensional monitoring equipment available. Sarah's expedition would be the first deliberate attempt to cross into the reality where Tom and Janet existed, guided by someone who understood both the risks and the possibilities. The trail began at Sarah's childhood home, now preserved as the headquarters of the Morrison Foundation. As Sarah followed Janet's carefully drawn route, she experienced the same sense of walking through impossible terrain that other map followers had described. The familiar neighborhood streets led her through landscapes that shifted between memory and reality, past landmarks that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "I'm walking through our evening walks from when I was 8 years old," Sarah radioed back to Dr. Rodriguez. "But I'm also hiking through a forest that somehow contains every trail my parents ever explored with me. It's like all our family adventures are happening at the same time, in the same place." The journey took her through emotional territory, as well as physical space. At each landmark on Janet's map, Sarah encountered memories that provided new understanding of her parents' decision to explore dimensional boundaries. She realized they hadn't just stumbled into another reality. They'd been preparing for the crossing their entire lives, learning skills that would let them navigate between worlds. When Sarah reached the final coordinates on her mother's map, she found herself standing in a campsite that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. She could see her parents' tent, could smell the familiar scent of Tom's camp coffee, could hear Janet humming the songs she'd sung during family camping trips. But she could also see Dr. Rodriguez's monitoring equipment in the regular world, could hear radio transmissions from search teams, could feel her feet firmly planted in the Tennessee soil where her parents had vanished 8 years earlier. She existed in both realities at once, connected to each, but not trapped in either. "I can see them," Sarah transmitted back to Dr. Rodriguez. "They're exactly as they were, but also changed in ways I can't explain. They're still Tom and Janet, still my parents, but they've become something more. guides who help people navigate not just through wilderness, but through the wilderness of difficult life decisions. The reunion lasted 3 days in dimensional time, though only 6 hours passed in the regular world. Sarah learned that her parents had indeed found other missing persons who'd crossed over, creating a community dedicated to helping people in various realities find their way through impossible challenges. "We're cartographers of possibility now," Tom explained to his daughter. "We map routes through problems that seem unsolvable, showing people pathways they couldn't see from inside their regular reality." Janet added, "Every map that appears in your world is our way of reaching out to someone who needs a different perspective on their situation. We've learned that sometimes you have to step outside normal reality to find solutions to problems that exist within it." But the most important discovery was that Sarah could return to her own dimension while maintaining her connection to her parents' reality. She'd learned to exist in what Tom called dimensional overlap, awareness of multiple realities that allowed her to help people in ways she'd never imagined possible. When Sarah returned to the regular world, she brought with her abilities that transformed the Morrison Foundation's work. She could sense when missing persons cases involved dimensional crossings versus conventional disappearances. She could guide families toward discoveries that would bring them peace, even when traditional searches failed. Most remarkably, she could teach others to follow their own impossible maps, internal routes through personal challenges that required the same kind of dimensional thinking that had guided her parents into their new existence. "My parents didn't just get lost and found," Sarah explained at the Foundation's annual conference. "They discovered that reality has more rooms than most people know about, and they're teaching the rest of us that sometimes the solutions to our problems exist in spaces we haven't learned to see yet." The Morrison Foundation evolved beyond missing persons research into something unprecedented, an organization that helped people navigate impossible situations by teaching them to think dimensionally about their problems. Sarah's experience had proven that the skills required for dimensional travel, trusting intuition over logic, following routes that didn't make conventional sense, believing in destinations that couldn't be proven to exist, were exactly the same skills people needed to solve seemingly impossible life challenges. Today, 10 years after Tom and Janet Morrison vanished into the Great Smoky Mountains, their maps continue appearing worldwide. But now the phenomenon includes maps drawn by other dimensional explorers, other missing persons who've learned to guide people from their positions between realities. The maps have become symbols of hope, not just for families of missing persons, but for anyone facing challenges that seem impossible to overcome. They represent the revolutionary idea that problems aren't always solved by working harder within existing limitations. Sometimes they're solved by learning to think outside the boundaries of what most people believe is possible. Dr. Rodriguez's research has established dimensional navigation as a legitimate field of study, with applications ranging from therapy to problem-solving to community development. Universities offer courses in reality boundary studies, teaching students to recognize when conventional approaches to challenges need to be supplemented with dimensional thinking. Tom Morrison's final map wasn't just a route through the wilderness, Dr. Rodriguez concluded in her landmark paper on the phenomenon. It was humanity's first guide to navigating the multidimensional nature of existence itself. Every person who's followed one of these maps has learned something fundamental. Reality is far more flexible than we've been taught to believe. But perhaps the most profound impact has been on how we understand love and loss. The Morrison case has shown that some connections transcend dimensional boundaries, that disappearance doesn't always mean ending, and that the people we love most might find ways to guide us even from places we can't see or reach. Sarah Morrison continues to exist in multiple realities, splitting her time between the regular world where she leads the foundation and the dimensional overlap where she works alongside her parents as guides for people facing their own impossible journeys. "Love doesn't end when people disappear," she said in a recent interview. It just finds new ways to express itself. My parents are still taking care of people, still helping families find their way through difficult terrain. They're just doing it from a place where the rules are different, where caring can reach across dimensions and impossibility becomes another word for possibility. The maps keep appearing because the work continues. In realities we're only beginning to understand, Tom and Janet Morrison persist in their mission of helping people navigate impossible terrain. Their camping trip has become something eternal, an exploration that bridges worlds and connects all who need guidance through the wilderness of difficult circumstances. And in that truth, every person facing seemingly impossible challenges can find both mystery and hope, knowing that sometimes the solutions we need exist not in the world we can see, but in the spaces between realities, mapped by guides who've learned that love's greatest expression might be helping others find pathways through the impossible toward destinations they never knew were waiting for them.